Chairman. Call Sue Keedgley.
Mr Chair, I would like first just to say that to record really my disappointment that the debate on such a significant bill was so truncated, that I hadn't even had time to introduce any of my amendments to the last part of the bill. This is a bill about a major change in New Zealand, about a bill that allows the privatisation of our water supplies, the ownership of our water supplies by private multinational corporations for 35 years, and we had a very truncated debate, and this is being rammed through under urgency. And I think that the public has a right to at least allow members of Parliament to have a say about this far-reaching set of amendments, and at least to introduce our amendments. So I would like to record my disappointment at the truncated nature of that debate on that hugely significant bill before us. Now, I'm quite certain that Roger Kerr from the Business Roundtable is listening with mounting satisfaction to this bill, to all of the parts of this bill, because Roger Kerr, the Business Roundtable, Infrastructure New Zealand, they have been lobbying since the 90s for governments to allow the privatisation of our water supplies. I have a number here of policy statements and articles that Roger Kerr has written, pointing out about how the private companies have a $300 billion, they've got annual revenues of $300 billion, the private water companies, and begging us in New Zealand to allow the opening up of our water supplies, our publicly owned water supplies, and allow these private corporations to take over our water supplies. So he has achieved his wildest dreams. For 20, 30 years he's been lobbying for this day, and he and others will be listening to the debate with huge satisfaction. Finally, their lobbying efforts have paid off, and from now on, multinational corporations will be able to take over our water supplies for 35 years. They'll be able to own them, control them, and manage them for 35 years. What a coup. So, Roger, I know you'll be listening. You must be enormously satisfied. Now, the sections we're dealing with now are about the long-term plans and the financial strategy. Well, the key thing is that the consultation requirements in the long-term plan and in other parts of local government have been absolutely gutted by this legislation. Now, when they consult on the long-term plan, councils won't even have to mention that they have an intention to privatise the water supplies for 35 years. They have an intention to hand them over to a private corporation to own for 35 years. But they won't have to mention this. No need any longer to bother to consult with communities about such a significant thing. And this is the real coup of this bill. And this is why Roger Kerr, the Business Roundtable, the water infrastructure companies will be rubbing their hands with glee about this bill, and I predict that there will be parties all weekend from the water companies who have been booted out of communities and countries all around the world, that now they can, when they close down their operations in Latin America, even in Adelaide in Australia, they've just been kicked out of Adelaide, so now they can pick up their pieces and come across to New Zealand, and they can seek to privatise our water supplies. So there will be parties all weekend, and one of the main things they will be celebrating is the fact that they're going to be able to sneak privatisation in, because they won't even have to consult with citizens, because the long-term plans, we no longer have a requirement to mention in a long-term plan that we're about to privatise our water supplies. Now, the other part, this deals also with the financial strategy, and one of the many clever little Rodney Hyde things that he has managed to get into this bill is an innocuous-sounding clause which basically would require a cap on rates. Now, this is based on the Colorado system. Mr. Speaker,
Sue Keighley.
This is based on a financial and expenditure limit that we have seen in America in places like Colorado, where they set a cap on spending. So in Colorado, they're not allowed to increase the budget under legislation similar to this. And the aim, of course, is to reduce spending, make us all resent paying our rates, to drive down the resources of local government to the point where it becomes bankrupt. So what happened in Colorado when they implemented these sort of rate capping provisions in this bill? Well, as a result of the grand experiment that this bill is trying to implement, the Colorado budget will have a shortfall of $28 million this year, 10% of its budget, brought about by the strangulating effects of this sort of cap. 1/3 of Colorado Springs' 24,000 streetlights were turned off earlier this year to save around $1 million of expenditure. And residents can adopt a street light. They're encouraged to do so by paying $100 a year if they want a light in their street. Taxi drivers, meantime, are trying to do the work of police because the police are so overstretched by cuts. Park budgets have been slashed by 25%. Grass is now mown monthly, not weekly. Buses have been sold. Bus services no longer operate in the evenings and weekends. The fire and the police budgets lost $5.5 million. Now, is this what we want here in New Zealand? I'm sure we don't. What the people of New Zealand don't want this, but this is what is being sneaked through, along with all these other sinister provisions, through urgency in this bill, which of course is all about seeking to it's seeking to implement Rogernomics Part 2, the battleground for the agenda of the government and of Rodney Hyde to corporatise and privatise as many assets as possible, has shifted to local government in this term of office because the government has had to rule out national privatisations, and this bill is a triumph. It is the culmination. It allows local government to corporatise most of their assets, to contract out and to privatise their water supplies. And the government is hoping that by sneaking this under urgency, the people of New Zealand won't notice. They're also hoping that we won't think that allowing a private multinational corporation to own water supplies for 35 years, we will think this doesn't amount to water privatisation, which in the Orwellian double-speak of the opposition, of the National Party, that's what they are claiming. But do not believe New Zealanders will be fooled. So New Zealanders need to be aware that this is what this rate capping provision in this section, in the financial strategy section, this is what it's intended to do. It is intended to reduce spending in local government to the point where local government is more and more short of money, it goes bankrupt, then it's required, as they have in Colorado and other places, to contract out, to privatise not just the water supplies for 35 years, but all of the other services. This is the agenda of this part of the bill and the other parts of the bill, and that is why private water companies will be rubbing their hands with glee. That is why Roger Kerr, 20 years of lobbying has finally paid off, and he and the water companies have finally got their goal of allowing them to get their hands on our water supplies, and also of deregulating the whole water supply industry in New Zealand. It is way beyond their wildest dreams. Already we've got two of the major global water companies, Veolia and Suez, have 39 contracts between them in Australia and New Zealand, including ownership of United Water in Auckland and the water's privatisation of the water program here in New Zealand. Its name has changed about 3 times because the ownership of that company has changed over 3 times in the last decade or so. But Veolia, this private water corporation, owns the water in Wellington and in Auckland already, and now under this bill they're going to be able to get their hands on the rest of the water supplies of New Zealand, and they're not even going to have to tell people in their long-term community plans. They're not going to have to consult with their community. They're not going to, because